Welcome to Matters Financial and Geopolitical from the Frontier. I hope the week has gone well. I took this photograph at about 6:30 in the morning. Good morning world from Nairobi, wishing you a fabulous Friday. And I took it looking away towards Thika, which is an angle I don't normally get from my office, but the sun was rising. Certainly it's great to be on a Friday, isn't it? I look forward to hosting Dennis McCory next Saturday, not this Saturday, next Saturday at Mindspeak at the Intercontinental. Dennis has a very interesting story to tell, and he's evidence of Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hours theory, and it's extremely similar to the Bill Gates story in Malcolm Gladwell. He's in the IT side of the economy, and very interesting chap. Yesterday I was sort of thinking to myself, and I came to the conclusion that the new normal is a very arrhythmic world. And then I looked up arrhythmia, and according to dictionary.com, it came up with this. For years he'd been studying the phenomenon of chaos, of which an arrhythmic heartbeat was a perfect example. Gabriel Garcia Marquez, what matters in life is not what happens to you, but what you remember and how you remember it. I like this photograph from the New Yorker, which is obviously a cave painting from a long time ago, and it's of a hand. I thought, my goodness, our hands, if you think of our hands, go back hundreds of years. And then I like that photograph I took yesterday of the Indian Ocean with just one tourist in that hotel other than ourselves, who were attending an investor relations conference. The Four Seasons Milan tweeted swimming pool relaxing area, and actually I had the good fortune to spend about 2 hours in that very wonderful spa of theirs, and it really is remarkable, with the most incredible steam room. So I'll put up a photograph of that. We are not witnessing the flow of information so much as pure spectacle or information made sacred, ritually unreadable. The small monitors of the office, home and car become a kind of idolatry here, where crowds might gather in astonishment. Hysteria at high speeds, day to day, minute to minute. People in free societies don't have to fear the pathology of the state. We create our own frenzy, our own mass convulsions, driven by thinking machines that we have no final authority over. The frenzy is barely noticeable most of the time. It's simply how we live. She finished with a laugh. The truth was mapped and slow and set in decline. He was seeing something elaborately different from what he encountered step by step in the ordinary run of hours. He had to learn how to see it correctly, find a crack in the world where it might fit. That's Don Delillo, Falling Man, which I finished on my way back from Diani on the plane. Political reflections. Now officials and experts say it is ambiguous warfare that is focusing minds within NATO. We need to mature the way we think about cyber, the way we think about irregular warfare, said US Air Force General Philip Breedlove, NATO's Supreme Allied Commander. What they, NATO, don't have at this stage is any kind of doctrine for using them in situations short of outright war, says John Bassett, a former GCHQ official. There's been a lack of willingness to focus on the area beyond diplomacy, but below the threshold of traditional military conflict, and there is still a very long way to go. Some strategists suggest NATO is not currently up to dealing with the situation. A Russian unconventional attack using asymmetric tactics designed to slip below NATO's response threshold would be particularly difficult to counter, said a report last month from Britain's Parliamentary Defence Select Committee. They are an imminent threat to every interest we have, whether it's in Iraq or anywhere else, This is Chuck Hagel yesterday at a Pentagon news conference. The Islamic State is as sophisticated and well-funded as any group that we have seen, Hagel said. They're beyond just a terrorist group. They marry ideology, a sophistication of strategic and tactical military prowess. They are tremendously well-funded. The US intelligence community thinks Islamic State has an incentive to conduct a major terrorist strike against US or European targets, in part to further assert itself as the true leader of radical Islam, according to 5 US intelligence officials who briefed reporters last week on condition of anonymity to discuss intelligence assessments. Hagel said US airstrikes in Iraq have stalled the group's momentum and enabled Iraqi and Kurdish forces to regain their footing and take the initiative. Can they be defeated without addressing that part of their organization which resides in Syria? Dempsey said. The answer is no. That will have to be addressed on both sides of what is essentially at this point a non-existent border, he said. That's an interesting development, isn't it? I don't think it's going to be a matter of hot pursuit. I think it's going to be a matter of collaboration, which is extraordinary when you look back at events to 2011 when everyone was calling for Assad's departure. Dempsey said Islamic State, which the US intelligence community says numbers about 10,000, poses a more immediate threat to Europe than to the US. The immediacy is in the number of Europeans and other nationalities who have come to the region to become part of that ideology, and those folks can go home at some point, Dempsey said. US and UK authorities are investigating the video showing Foley's murder that's narrated by a man with a British accent. The terrorists can be contained in Iraq on the battlefield, although not in perpetuity, Dempsey said. This is an organization that has an apocalyptic, end-of-days strategic vision, and which will eventually have to be defeated. The methods of attacking Islamic State will require all of the tools of national power, diplomatic, economic, information, military, Dempsey said. Now let's go to Pepe Escobar, whose piece in the Asia Times about the same matter, Roving Eye, the killer on the Saudi King's Highway. There's danger on the edge of town, ride the King's Highway, baby. Weird scenes inside the gold mine, ride the highway west, baby. The doors, the end. The killer awoke before dawn. He put his American desert boots on. He took a knife from the ancient gallery, and he walked on down the hall, bathed in desert sunlight. Choice scenery, good sound and vision production values, careful editing, no unnecessary gore, no blood splattering, no Allahu Akbar shrieks. A message to America indeed, but most of all a message to the Ummah, as in we're the men in black, badasses. We run the caliphate. We're no mere death cult. We're winners, and we take no prisoners. And why did Islamic State, formerly ISIS, become winners? Because the West regimented, schooled, trained, logistically helped, and weaponized most of IS's Takfiri goons with a mission at hand to destroy Syria. The West lauded them as Syrian rebels, freedom fighters. The House of Saud, directly and indirectly, and the proverbial wealthy Gulf Cooperation Council donors are the mom and dad of ISIS, all duly vetted, approved by the industrial, military Orwellian panopticon complex. How convenient that the mighty Orwellian panopticon complex satellite maze could not identify a long convoy of gleaming white Toyotas crossing the desert towards their summer conquests, and how convenient that a Briton beheading an American. What a special relationship. Plot twist fully sanctions the return of Iraq bombing for months, in Obama's words. More strikes, more drones, perhaps more boots on the ground, perhaps in the near future a Syria extension. And then there's this ultimate plot twist, a pearl by a dissident Saudi researcher in Arabic. He argues in detail that IS is essentially a revival of pure Wahhabism. Not only that IS comes from outside the House of Saud's dominions in Iraq and the Levant, but tries hard to shatter the monarchy's legitimacy. The House of Saud's counterpunch to the Arab Spring was and remains all about destroying or at least isolating the Muslim Brotherhood as an alternative Islamic role model. Yet now comes IS, brimming with religious justification, however warped, military know-how, and an army of true and well-paid believers. Ride the King's Highway, baby. No staged, not staged beheading could possibly top the ultimate blowback, the West nurturing the beast who would slouch towards Mecca to finally behead the House of Saud. And those killers shall also speak with a British accent. I'll put up an image of the video that shows the purported heading of Foley, and another photograph of James Foley resting in a room at the airport of Sirte, Libya, where he worked in 2011. James, a fellow on Reuters, saying the Islamic State buys itself a day of horror, but little else, by killing James Foley. By uploading a video of its execution of journalist James Foley to the web on Tuesday, the Islamic State achieves the impossible. It re-executes him every time somebody presses play. The horror of perpetual re-execution was obviously the Islamic State's goal. Nobody with a soul, knowing what's coming, can listen to Foley's speech without their hearts going full throttle and shuddering at the murderous climax. For its troubles, the Islamic State has gotten a sliver of what it wants today. The story dominates the news. This video has become available on every desktop, laptop, and smartphone in the world. People are beseeching one another not to link to the video. And yet video beheading seems to be a strategy to nowhere. Al-Qaeda attempted similar contamination of our dream pools more than a decade ago with its 2002 video killing of Wall Street Journal reporter Daniel Pearl, which was also disseminated on the web. The New Yorker has an interesting perspective, saying Foley's execution was presented as a choreographed message to America by this band of performance-minded terrorists. The voice of Foley's black-hooded executioner is heard in the video. He appears to have a British accent. This has alarmed many in the United Kingdom, including its security services, which have become increasingly aware that they have a problem on their hands. Last year, 2 British converts to Islam publicly beheaded Lee Rigby, an off-duty British serviceman in a London suburb. Yesterday's guerrillas have given way to terrorists, and now terrorists have given way to this new band, who are something like serial killers. ISIS, an organization of thugs, is the Middle East's answer to the psycho-killer narco gang Los Zetas, trying to outbad their enemies, to frighten them into submission, and to somehow draw themselves into an ugly cartoon of evil. This is interesting. Last week I met with Faisal Ali Warabi, a politician in the Justice and Welfare Party from Somaliland. He is a candidate in next year's presidential elections. As a younger man, he was a socialist and a devotee of Che Guevara. Last year, he lost his 22-year-old son Saeed, who was born and raised in Finland, to the dark enticements of ISIS. His son had also persuaded his young new wife to join him, and the two now live, according to his father, near the town of Raqqa, ISIS' main urban stronghold in Syria. Faisal showed me a recent video of his son posted on an ISIS website on his smartphone. It shows a black turbaned young man mounted on a horse, talking in heavily accented Finnish and smiling into the camera, calling himself Abu Shuaib al-Somali. Saeed says, "The rule of Sharia will even come to Finland, and if you get called, then alhamdulillah, you'll enter Jannah, paradise, inshallah, and Allah will take care of the ones you've left behind." I asked Faisal what he thought of ISIS and about what his son is doing. He shook his head sadly, raised his hands helplessly in the air, and said they are the new barbarians. Robert Fisk has an interesting piece, Airstrikes Talk of God, Obama is following the jihadist script. As for the sinister British executioner John, I rather think he may have lived in Newcastle upon Tyne or Gateshead, because having spent time on Tyneside, I thought he seemed to have just a hint of Geordie accent. But John could have been French or Russian or Spanish. It's not what went wrong in his mind, but what phenomena have afflicted so many other young men in their thousands to do the same. How, for example, did an Australian apparently allow his young son to pose with the head of a decapitated Syrian soldier, a soldier serving, of course, in the army of the Assad regime we have all sworn to overthrow? And how have our security services responded to this with the usual nonsense about how merely looking at such gruesome execution videotapes may be a terrorist crime? What is this tosh? Personally, I find it equally offensive to film and to show on television the mass killing of human beings by US aircraft, but we do show them, don't we? So are our security bosses going to make the viewing of US military target videos a terrorist crime? I doubt it, unless of course the film shows us massacring lots of civilians. Then they could claim rightly that such viewing might encourage terrorism, and we'd all have to give up covering the war. And I take you back to an article I wrote on the 17th of September 2012, where I said one of the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims. And I took that quote from the US Army War College Quarterly in 1997, where the US officer assigned to the Deputy Chief of Staff of Intelligence charged with defining the future of warfare wrote, "One of the defining bifurcations of the future will be the conflict between information masters and information victims. This information warfare will not be couched in the rationale of geopolitics," the author suggests, "but will be spawned like any Hollywood drama out of raw emotions, hatred, jealousy, greed, emotions rather than strategy will set the terms of emotion warfare struggles." I think in particular that the Islamic State have proven extremely adept at using the force multiplier effect of the new digital ecosystem. Islamic State militants control large swathes in Syria and Iraq. I'll put up a photograph I saw on the BBC and I'll leave it at that. The bodies and ashes of 20 Malaysians killed when the Malaysian Airlines Flight 17, MH17, was shot down over Ukraine in July have arrived home. And interestingly, first of all, obviously I'm not inclined to the view that MH17 was shot down by the Ukrainians as they flew and escorted that plane alongside, because if you look at the fuselage damage, it looks like very heavy machine gun fire. I still think that's the case. And it was His Excellency Johan Borgstam, the Swedish ambassador, who told me that the signal in all the noise that the world had moved into a whole new, what I call arrhythmic normal, was the disappearance of MH370. Yields on Spanish and Italian 10-year bonds, which move inversely to prices, fell to Euro-era lows of 2.38% and 2.58%. Portuguese yields fell to a near-decade low of 3.24%, despite fears about weaknesses in its banking system, triggered by last month's crisis over Banco Espirito Santo. Flash estimates that came out yesterday showed momentum in the German economy, and I think this is where the Russian standoff is beginning to hurt Germany, had slowed on the back of a weaker performance of its manufacturing sector. The euro is at 132.86, dollar index 82.11, Japanese yen 103.77, the dollar touched 103.96, highest since April 4. It's up 1.3% this week, most since March 7. Swiss franc 0.9108, pound still below 166 at 165.82, Aussie 0.9323, India rupee 60.405, South Korean won, that's been strong of late, 10.1864 notwithstanding a rate cut, Rial 226.95, Egyptian pound 715.01, South African rand 1069.61. Euro dollar, I'll put up a 3-month chart. The dollar yesterday touched 132.42, strongest since September the 10th. Dollar index 82.11, it has eased off the highs from yesterday, and that's because Yellen is scheduled to deliver a speech titled Labour Markets at the Jackson Hole Symposium, and I think there's an expectation she might be less hawkish, and therefore there's a little bit of adjustment ahead of the weekend. But don't forget, I took a photograph of the Department of the Treasury and I tweeted this is where QE and all the money printing happens. But the point I'm trying to make is that they've significantly reduced the money printing. The Dow Jones and S&P are near multi-year highs, all-time highs. I'll put up a chart of that. I like this Heaven's Gate, Dresdner's home in Birmingham, designed by architect Stephen Sivak. the entry court, accessed by the vertical slit at the far right, is open to the sky. Gold, 1279.39, dropped 1.5% yesterday to settle at 1275.40, touched 1273.40, which was the lowest since June 18. Prices fell for a fifth session, the longest run since June 2nd, and that's all about dollar strength beginning to hurt the gold bulls. Crude oil, $93.84, headed for a fifth weekly decline, longest losing streak in 9 months. I think it's overcooked to the downside here. The market has stripped out most of the risk premium associated with oil prices and is focusing on demand and supply fundamentals, and that just happened quite dramatically, hasn't it? But I think that supports the shilling. There are lots of concerns that shilling's about to break down big time. But when you look at what's happened on the oil price, and I'll put up the chart, 1 month price, you'll see what I'm talking about. But the concern with the shilling is obviously slowing tourism receipts. Lotte Licht tweeted a message from people to Uzbekistan's dictator, President Karimov. Korkay man means I'm not afraid. I like this comment. Africa is at a techno-cultural turning point that will prove to be as pivotal there as the Industrial Revolution was for Europe. I thought that was a great comment. South Africa's future influence depends on its role in the rest of Africa. That's a very important point. South Africa's future as an influential power in a fundamentally changed world is increasingly tied to its willingness to lead the rest of the African continent to peace and prosperity. Talk about the membership of BRICS. South Africa will have to play an even greater role in underwriting the stability and prosperity of its own neighborhood. South Africa and the BRICS in a new multilateral, multipolar world. If SA plays its cards right, it could hold its own as a regional pivot state in a context where US hegemony is waning and new rising powers are not yet willing or able to replace America in the global driving seat. The post-US world system may be more anarchic and less rules-based. South Africa could build its influence if it is not muscled out of its own backyard by BRICS powers. South African government could help to prevent that by insisting on a level playing field of fair labour practices, transparency of contracts, local ownership of projects, and sustainability of interventions. Described this lady, Sidiropoulos, says South Africa's foreign policy is often perceived as vague and implausibly idealistic. So pretty interesting. Do have a look at that. South African lawmakers chanted, "Pay back the money" at Zuma yesterday. "When are you paying the money?" asked a finger-wagging Julius Malema, leader of the far-left economic freedom fighters. "I've responded to all the reports as I'm supposed to. I've responded appropriately," a stony-faced Zuma replied. EFF members became increasingly raucous before Speaker Baleka Mbete ordered the session to be suspended as an awkward-looking Zuma face chants, "Pay back the money." South Africa has approved a treaty for $100 billion Inga hydropower. That's a big step, but there's got to be lots more before we see that really take place. South African oil share pretty much unchanged yesterday. It's up 11.213% this year. Dollar rand at 1069.44, Egyptian pound at 715.01. Egyptian stock market up 38.204%, came back 0.68% yesterday. It's Africa's second best after Dar es Salaam, which is up 50%. Nigeria all share is up 1.059% so far this year. The Ghana Stock Exchange up 3.076% so far this year. But of course, you've lost all that and plus more because the currency has collapsed. A decree issued on August 19 by President Salva Kiir announced that Nyan Deng has been fired. Rebecca Nyan Deng is the widow of the late rebel leader and first vice president of South Sudan, John Garang. And that speaks to a schism at the very heart of the SPLM. Ethiopia's Arabica coffee export earnings are forecast to climb 25% to about $900 million in 2014-2015 because of higher prices after drought-damaged plants in the biggest grower of bean in Brazil. Arabica coffee has surged 71% in New York since January after drought hurt plantings in Brazil. Can China save Africa's elephants? Asked Bloomberg View. There's no consensus on just how many of Africa's elephants are left. The World Wildlife Fund, for example, estimates that the population could be as few as 470,000 or as many as 690,000. I reckon it's less than 470. Whatever the exact figure, it's clear that China's demand for ivory has created significant financial incentives for poachers to hunt the herds that remain scattered across the continent. Pretty hard-hitting. It's a horrible story, and it's just appalling. I, for one, really wish that something was done about it. A very interesting report on Newsweek, which is, sorry, I'll just put up that photograph I liked of the elephants in the Ambiguous. Sorry, my pages were misfiled, that I took in September 23rd. Just look at the back side of that matriarchal elephant at the back of this photograph. There are over 10,000 potholes on the Lagos-Badagry Expressway, 4,000 in central Nairobi and 3,500 in Dar es Salaam, according to M&G. Then going back, if you haven't read that piece that I wrote, the Ebola virus is non-linear, the point I was making is that viruses exhibit non-linear and exponential characteristics. And I was saying the new cheek-by-jowl living arrangements in so many of our cities in Africa presented the Ebola virus with practically optimal conditions. Liberia police fired on protesters as West Africa's Ebola toll hits 1,350. Police in the Liberian capital fired live rounds and tear gas on Wednesday to disperse a stone-throwing crowd trying to break an Ebola quarantine imposed on the neighborhood, as the death toll from the epidemic in West Africa hit 1,350. It was unclear whether anyone was wounded by the gunfire. The soldiers are using live rounds, said Army spokesman Dessalines Allison. World Health Organization said the countries hit by the worst ever outbreak of the deadly virus were beginning to suffer shortages of fuel, food and basic supplies after shipping companies and airlines suspended services to the region. The epidemic of the hemorrhagic fever, which can kill up to 90% of those it infects, is ravaging 3 small West African states of Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea. It also has a toehold in Nigeria. Liberia is where the death toll is rising fastest. They are struggling to recover from a devastating 1989-2003 civil war. And then these comments, where this unrest happened was in an area called West Point. I don't have any food and we're scared. This is somebody, Alpha Barry. West Point residents said they were given no warning. Apparently they created a blockade which prevented them from getting to work or buying food. Many people in impoverished parts of Monrovia buy food to eat each day rather than stocking it. Residents said the closure immediately caused prices of basic goods, including drinking water sold in sachets, to soar. So you can see, and then in the same report, Democratic Republic of Congo sent its health minister and a team of experts to the remote Equateur province after several people died there from a disease with Ebola-like symptoms, a local official and a professor said. Newsweek is carrying the story that smuggled bush meat is Ebola's backdoor to America. In the Bronx, the high price up to $100 for 6 or 7 pounds attached to bush meat, or viande de brousse, as it is known in the French-speaking world, indicates a luxury indulgence in the same way illegally imported caviar might for Russian emigres in Brooklyn. Bush meat may be a luxury, but it may also pose a deadly threat. A memo obtained by Newsweek that circulated among customs officers and agricultural specialists in 2007 noted that bushmeat is a potential vector of diseases such as monkeypox, Ebola virus, severe acute respiratory syndrome, and other communicable diseases. Internal documents show that from 2009 to 2013, the U.S. Customs and Border Protection Agency confiscated over 69,000 different bushmeat items, with seizures ranging from dried bat to smoked monkey. And that's likely a mere sliver compared with what actually gets into the U.S. At least one estimate puts the number at 15,000 pounds every month. New York City is home to nearly 77,000 West Africans, most of them in the Bronx, and is the epicenter of the bushmeat trade in the US. There are very few direct flights from West Africa to the US. The majority of travelers first pass through Western Europe before connecting to New York. One recent study estimated that 273 tons of bushmeat is imported into Charles de Gaulle Airport on Air France carriers every year. From France, the imported goods often travel on to America. And in all of that, you can see the interconnectedness of the world that we now live in. And if you haven't seen that Vice documentary about monkey meat and the Ebola outbreak in Liberia, it's about a month old, but it's fascinating and gripping and speaks to the actual problem. Major General, this is coming to Kenya, Philip Kameru has been nominated as the Director General of the National Intelligence Service. I'll put up a photo of him. Clearly, national security, asymmetric threats have been front and centre, and we hope that we're now seeing the President get on top of this particular situation. TransCentury reported first half profit after tax loss of 1.6308 billion shillings. Turnover was down sharply to 4.9533 billion from 7.084 billion. Profit from operating activities was a loss of 1.148 billion versus a profit of 1.027 billion. Finance costs came down marginally. A loss before income tax 1.53 billion, loss after tax 1.63 billion. First half earnings per share negative 5 shillings and 92 cents versus positive 89 cents last time. They're saying the revenue in the power division grew 13%, driven by increased volumes of new markets. The overall decline in revenue is attributed to the delayed execution of several major construction projects in our engineering division, which have since commenced in the second half of the year. Decline in net earnings is attributed to the fair value loss on the disposal of the entire 34% shareholding KU Railways Holdings Limited, the lead investor in Rift Valley Railways, to Africa Railways Limited on 31st March 2014. The group realized $43.7 million from the sale, which saw it recover its entire cash investment in RVR. Decline in net earnings is attributed to the fair value loss on the disposal of the entire 34% shareholding. And I think essentially, they were not happy campers in that. This way they're getting their money out. So we knew there was going to be some damage. They put out a profits warning, and now we've had it. I'll put up a photograph of the Mombasa-Nairobi Railway just outside the entrance to Savo East, and another one of the railway crossing at Manyani Gate just outside the Savo. Business Daily has got an article about what Kenya's top firms are paying their CEOs. If you're interested, click on that link. Millicent Adiambo, the CEO of the Kenya Coast Tourism Association. It looks like Kenya is jinxed, especially this year. We had the attacks, then advisories, and now Ebola stares at us. I'll put up that photograph of the Indian Ocean south coast, and when everyone saw that on Twitter, they all told me how deserted it looked. Kenya shilling is a key chart support, 88.348 trading last. Nairobi All Share up 14.584% this year, not far off a record. NSE 20 fell 0.48% because of Kenya Airways' weakness yesterday. That's got caught up in the Ebola crossfire. The index has been above 5,000 since the 5th of August, however. I like this photograph that was tweeted by Kenya Pics, Lake Victoria. Samsung Galaxy Tab S was launched in Kenya. We filmed the event. I'll put up a link for that. And I like this description by the fellow for Samsung here. He said the Galaxy Tab S is built for the multimedia consumption in this age of virtual information. And congratulations to my friend Manoj and Samsung for bagging the 2014 Kenya Mobile Phones Competitive Strategy Innovation and Leadership Award given by Frost & Sullivan. A British terrorism suspect in Kenya is no monster and has been falsely linked with a fugitive jihadist from the UK dubbed the White Widow, his lawyer told a court on Thursday. Grant had questioned why the media was hell-bent to portray him before Kenyans as a monster and pressure this court to ensure he doesn't get out of jail, Mwita added. Police this month said they had lost the trail of Luthwaite. Kenyan media have reported several occasions in which witnesses have seen a mystery white woman during a string of grenade attacks and killings in the coastal region, who apparently then vanishes without a trace. There have been reported sightings of her riding a camel in Somalia, as well as appearing on the other side of Africa in Nigeria. Grant is believed to have become radicalized as a teenager in the same British prison where shoe bomber Richard Reed first turned to Islam. Richard, who claimed he was an Al-Qaeda recruit, is serving a life sentence in the United States for trying to blow up a flight from Paris to Miami in December 2001. Of course, I wrote that piece immediately after Westgate, and I called it Reflections on Westgate, Samantha Lewthwaite and the White Widow, and I gave a backgrounder about her. Then I jumped to Westgate, referred to a tweet that came out from the Al-Shabaab handle, 14-hour standoff relayed in 1,400 rounds of bullets and 140 characters of vengeance, and still ongoing. Good morning, Kenya. Another read here, the two Mujahideen inside Westgate Mall unruffled and strolling around the mall in such sangfar manner. I thought that word was very interesting, and I put Samantha Lewthwaite either in there or just outside there during that Westgate attack. And on that note, I'll put up a photograph from 332 days ago of Westgate on fire. Once again, wishing you a super weekend. Thank you so much. Sorry about it being so verbose today, but I thought that was an interesting subject about ISIS and about these recruitment and the whole thing that's going on there. It's pretty extraordinary.